Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 36. In this episode, we're talking about everything you need to know about nutrition. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and hopefully, we can dispel that and give you a grounding of how to better assess what you read and what you hear. And so, with that, we'll jump into the first question, which is where to start with nutrition. And so, for me, I think where you want to start with nutrition, you start with where you don't start, which is supplements. I think a lot of people have probably seen supplements and things like back when I was younger, a big one was called hydroxycut, which is supposed to help you lose fat. Um, a lot of supplements aren't very well reviewed. It's kind of the Wild West. Really, there's only two supplements of any significant support for working out and health, and one of them is more just for performance in the gym, which is caffeine, and the other one is creatine. So we can get to that later. I think where you start with nutrition is getting a sense of what you're eating and understanding macronutrients. I think that's where I would start, is understanding macronutrients, what is ideal and what you need to support whatever fitness goal or health journey that you're on.
Okay, so let's start with macros then.
Sure.
I know the three basic macros. We have protein, we have carbs, and we have I'm blanking. What's the last one?
Protein, carbs, and fat.
Fat. Okay, so
Technically, alcohol also a macro.
wait,
Not
really?
really one that you program in, but it's technically a macro as well.
Okay, so I've heard the guideline with protein is like a good place to start, and then like
Yes,
you kind of fill in everything else with carbs and fat.
correct.
So the general guideline I heard was like zero point 0.7 to 1 grams of protein per pound of body weight.
Yes.
Is that a good rule of thumb for everyone to follow, or is that a good rule of thumb just for people that are more into working out?
So you kind of have to zoom out even one step before that. So why do we start with protein? You start with protein because you are generally anyone who's generally interested in all of this stuff is interested in gaining muscle or maintaining muscle during a cut, which is when you go below your caloric requirements on a daily basis so that you can lose weight, preferentially fat over muscle. So um, that's why protein is important. The zero point 0.7 to 1 gram, that is generally seen as what's necessary to build muscle. If you are looking to maintain muscle in a caloric surplus, which is, or maybe in maintenance, which is when you're just maintaining weight, um, I think if I remember correctly, you can survive with zero point 0.5 grams per pound of protein. But again, this is all a range. And so if you're trying to push for optimal, it's zero point 0.7 to 1. Now, all that being said, if you have dietary restrictions or requirements, zero point 0.7 to 1 is pretty easy to hit if you are willing to do dairy and or soy or meat. Um, I guess there's the vegan protein powders as well, but they're just a little harder to drink that much of. If you are truly just trying to get protein through vegetables, it's pretty difficult to get that level of protein. I guess the second part of protein, and a lot of the reason why people start there, is not only is protein useful when you eat it as whole foods, it's useful for you to gain muscle. It's also very satiating. And so protein is good for when you're in a caloric surplus, which is when you're trying to gain weight and add muscle. It's also useful in a cut when you are going to be a little bit hungry. You're going to try to eat as much protein as you can to, one, maintain as much muscle as you can on top of working out, as well as make you feel a bit fuller. Really calorically dense foods, which are highly processed foods like candy bars, junk food, ice cream, those have a lot of calories and they don't fill you up at all. So you can eat those when you're trying to gain weight. That's probably okay if you can stay within your macros. Really not a place anything to touch when you're trying to lose weight because you're already gonna be hungry, and eating foods that are super calorically dense means you're going to feel super hungry because you won't have much in your stomach.
Man, there's a lot of questions that I have, but I guess the first one is where, why is this even important for, say, an average viewer like our podcast listeners, or why is this even important to someone like me? Like, why would I even think about nutrition?
I think at a base level, there is a need to support your fitness journey in life. I think that's a good thing to dedicate yourself to for life if you want to live a longer life. And so, even if you're not trying to become uh, Sebum, which is a world famous bodybuilder who also takes steroids. Um, if your goal isn't to become a bodybuilder, natural or not, then at some level it's still helpful for you to understand what you're putting in your body. Because just like sleep is useful to understand how that's helpful for your performance in Valorant and in life in general, so is your general understanding of nutrition, because once you break down and you understand how the macros work and what are the general good ranges, then you do have the building blocks for how to better understand what a healthy diet looks like, and being able to um, pick a healthy diet that also matches what you like. Some people eat tons of cottage cheese because it's high protein and it's low calorie. Some people think cottage cheese is disgusting, which is totally fine. And so if you understand what you're trying to achieve through macros, then you can make better food decisions. You can also better understand, in the States, it was really pioneered that when you go to most food places now, they have the caloric breakdown right there, but it's not hard to find the macro breakdown too. And so you can begin to see one, which ones are the healthier choices, or in general, if you go to some place like Cheesecake Factory, you can see how unhealthy everything is, right? And
Right.
so I think it's supportive of you to make better decisions. Certainly, it's crucial if you want to be um, gaining muscle and becoming more fit. It's a super big part of that journey, whether that's a cardio journey and becoming more fit in that way, or a uh, uh, strength journey.
In terms of performance, I guess I'm curious on nutrition. Is there a certain type of diet that I need to be thinking about for performance,
Mm,
like carnivore diet, or is there some type of macro split that will kind of lend itself to performance? Because anecdotally, people say the carnivore diet, you have less carbs, you think a little bit more clearer.
mhm.
Is that is number one true? Is that something that we should be thinking about?
So the carnivore diet is maybe the one diet I'd advocate against, or maybe with some slight adjustments. It's really a very narrow version of a paleo diet, which is a focus on eating only whole foods and really generally not very cooked and processed foods, it's not a bad thing. The problem with the carnivore diet is that it brings us back to a problem that plagued pirates in the 17th century, which is scurvy. If you have a diet for which if you follow and you don't take additional vitamins you get scurvy, I think that's a bad idea. I think it's really good to focus on whole foods. I i don't think it's bad to go on a keto diet, which is when you have no easily processable carbs. And so the way people do it is, a keto diet is when you only have carbs that basically match the carbs with the fiber. If you have fibrous vegetables, you might get 10 grams of carbs, let's say, and 9 grams of fiber, in which case you get 1 gram of net carbs. And that's not enough to put you out of keto, I think. So, what you're talking about is when you are on a keto diet, your body adapts to ketones instead of carbohydrates as a source for fuel. This was really popular a couple of years ago, and there's reasons that this isn't a bad thing. Some people find that being keto adopted, one, gives them more clarity. Two, some people find it much easier to stay on a healthier diet or within a good calorie range because they tend to not overeat. A lot of people find that if anyone's ever had like curry with rice, you know that when you have curry, you eat more rice. And so sometimes people when they have carbs in their diet, they find it really hard to cut back on carbs, whether that's rice or bread. And so keto then, as just a diet choice, helps them maintain a healthier lifestyle. Some people find they become keto adopted fairly quickly, and I've heard that ranges between 1 to 2 weeks. I've never done it myself. However, some people find it helps them with a clear mind. However, some people find that it makes them feel consistently quite sluggish. Some people get back to normal in the gym, as an example, and some people never do and they switch off of it. And so that's where you just have to get to know your body, and it is a bit of an experiment to see what works for you. Um, I will say there are, for what we do in terms of, unless you're a professional athlete, you could totally do keto. There are, I think, high level powerlifters that are keto. You could not, I think, be a professional athlete in the sense of playing soccer or basketball or any of the endurance sports while being keto adopted. You just, I don't think you can replenish your energy fast enough. People in endurance sports, in marathon running, they will drink almost pure sugar just to replenish their energy reserves. And so you can't really do that. You can't really scarf down a steak while you're running a marathon. So I think that's where maybe, or I don't think you want to drink oil. I'm not sure. Maybe there are solutions for this, but at the highest level of athletes, it is not a thing to be keto in those types of sports. So that would be my only caution out of it. I think keto is not bad. I think it's totally a reasonable thing to try amongst other diets out there as well. Some people might find that carbs are totally fine. I think the only thing I would caution against is the pure carnivore diet and not eating any fibrous vegetables. Part of just having a healthy, well-rounded diet is eating those from the source rather than having to take vitamins to get it, ideally.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So the carnivore diet is not necessarily bad, or like the keto diet isn't necessarily bad. You just want to make sure you're testing it for your body and seeing how it fits for you.
And you're getting the vegetables so you have the requisite vitamins so your body doesn't break down. I think that would be the bare minimum, and then from there it's really up to you. But actually, I want to rewind to the beginning of our conversation. You said, um, one thing. What is the first thing we need to understand about nutrition? I will revise my answer. I think it's actually something I alluded to when I was answering that first question, which is the concept of calories. So every person burns calories. That's why we need to eat. And if we didn't eat, we would slowly starve and then we would die. And so calories, our whole body is a bit of this black box in the sense that we ingest calories, we we use it up. Anything we don't use up, we turn into fat and store it. And then and if we don't use it up, if we don't get enough calories and it's not enough to um, manage our daily caloric needs, then we will lose weight. And so, really, that's kind of understanding that there's no way to game that. That's a fundamental thermodynamic thing at some level, and some people are more efficient and less efficient. If you eat more calories, more than you need on a daily basis, you will gain weight. And if you eat less than you need, you will lose weight. And then we adjust macros based on that to accomplish our goals. So if your goal is to gain weight and gain muscle and not fat, which is most people, that's where the macros come in and you would focus on making sure you get enough protein. And vice versa, when you are trying to lose weight, you need to make sure that you are less than what you need on a daily basis and you are getting enough protein. I, I guess the big part of this too is knowing that there's snake oil out there. There's nothing that really changes that thermodynamic principle. And so if stuff advocates that it does, it's not true because it's just,
Like you can't really target fat loss.
you can't really target fat loss. You can't, there's no one thing that's, that stuff, this one weird trick will help you burn belly fat. It doesn't. The way to burn belly fat is to eat less than you need and hopefully do enough exercise and eat enough protein that you don't lose muscle as you're losing body weight. So there's just no way around that. And so anything that's not that, it's snake oil. It's pretty simple and it's something that doesn't really change. So I just want to offer that. I do want to offer a flip side though, which is that it's good to understand your macros. I wouldn't suggest most people actually start off measuring macros and measuring all of their meals. Having done it for like even a year at a time, I think at one point, it's like a huge commitment and effort, and it can be quite overwhelming at first. And so, what I would suggest is if you're actually trying to make changes to your diet, to make it in a way that works for you and is sustainable, because what's optimal and what you can live with are sometimes different things. So, figuring out what you can live with and fits within your lifestyle is important. So for most people, I would never recommend you go right away to measuring macros and going on that. I think it starts with what are 1 to 2 reasonably simple changes you can make to your diet that will move you in the direction that you want to go and that you can live with or be happy to do. And so I think that's just an important thing to note. Oh, and I guess the other important thing to note is that neither myself nor Adam are nutritionists or doctors. So if at any point you are seeking to follow these, and you should be at least having a discussion with a doctor beforehand if you have any concerns.
Yep, that's always a good one. Gaming, there's a lot of people, like a lot of professionals that don't look healthy. They're either severely underweight. I kind of fit into that camp. And then you also have like the overweight or even the severely overweight
Mhm.
professionals. And when that is kind of shown to work and you can play at the highest level not being healthy, I think there's some type of not necessarily encouragement, but um at least in my head it's like, oh, maybe nutrition isn't that important, or maybe like I don't have to take care of my health that much in order to play well. And I guess I wanted to get your thoughts and opinions on that, because getting taking care of your health early is better than later, and maybe we can get some people on the right track.
I think there's kind of two answers to this. One is when you just zoom out, Valorant is fun and we enjoy playing games. You're going to play games for the rest of your life, hopefully, at some level. If you enjoy this, part of nutrition and health is so you can do that. And I think just zooming out, that you want to be playing the long game, that you can be healthy for the rest of your life so you can enjoy the things that you want to enjoy inside the game and outside the game. As it relates to performance of players and being overweight and underweight, certainly being overweight, I think you can perform, but there's a lot of significant negatives to being overweight or obese. You are putting yourself at way higher. They call it, there's the trifecta. They call it diabesity, which is when you are in that obese range or overweight, you have this super negative trifecta that will affect your lifespan and more importantly the quality of your life, which is you when you're overweight you tend to have high blood pressure, and you are at much higher risk of diabetes, and these kind of operate as a triangle, so you kind of tend to get all three. And so high blood pressure is probably the foremost marker or metric that will determine whether you get heart disease or some type of heart issue over your lifetime, because it's just putting your body at more stress. And then diabetes and your inability to manage insulin and sugar is a huge risk as it relates to just overall circulation, and then eventually not really being able to eat a full diet. And so I think when you look at those things, players that are in that range, they're not investing or thinking about the long term. I think when you also just look, I'm not sure you can look at these pros today and look at them as models of long term. If we think about pros that are playing esports, the only one that's lasted long term is Faker, and maybe he's an alien, right? Um, Everyone else is retiring super early, and so what does that tell you, right? If you've been able to make it and you're an extremely talented player, maybe even a generational player, and yet you are retiring early, I think that says a lot. Just look at Tens retiring, came in as a prodigy, won a few international events, and he's retiring. And I'm not saying that it's because of nutrition or health, but I'm just saying the sum total of the mental health, the demands of the schedule means that these players are not playing long careers, not like a LeBron James who's been in the league for forever. Those are players now in sports like the NBA and other sports that have played for a long time, because they take exceptional care of their health. And I think because this generation of esports player doesn't, and their schedule maybe doesn't allow for it, or it's not part of the culture, they aren't playing for that long. Like there's very few exceptions to that rule, and many more that have way shorter careers.
So instead of thinking about nutrition potentially as a performance enhancer or performance limiter, it sounds it's more like understanding your longevity and your lifespan in the game as a potential career. And I do think that is very fair to say is like if you think about esports in general, there's literally I can't think of really many players that have been playing for a long time. And that's like not true at all for athletes. Like athletes, they you can see like they've been in it for a very long time, and potentially even the longer they play, the more valuable they become at a certain point because they become veterans. But you don't really value veterans that much in esports. Like they get replaced pretty quickly by up and coming talent, and unless like you're in a specific role. So I think looking at it from that lens of just the length of your career is probably a more practical or maybe more digestible reason,
Mhm.
and I do think is a really good one.
The only thing I would say that would probably be important to performance is just noticing how you feel based on the types of foods you eat. Probably not going to be your peak of playing time after lunch in the afternoon, if that's when you get really sleepy, and probably not helpful for you to take a huge meal before then. I think the other thing to consider is use or lack of use of caffeine. Just noticing, does it make you more sharp or does it not make you? For some people, it has no effect, and for some people, it does. That's one of the few super well studied supplements. And for most people, it does have some level of positive effect. But that being said, that's something that's entirely personal. For some people, it has way too much effect and has makes them jittery. So that's just one thing to consider. That is one of the more well studied, probably the best studied supplement. Creatine will help us with your work. I don't know that it will be of necessarily performance enhancing as it relates to um, Valorant. And maybe lastly, water. Water is something we die faster from not having than food. And so it's a significant support of your physical performance. And I would intuit that it would be of significant support of your mental performance in Valorant as long as you're staying sufficiently hydrated.
Hydrate for headshot. Nat says that all the time. Yeah, I guess when I think another question I have with nutrition is like, how do you really balance this in your day? Because like you have a lot of restriction options, but then there's also a lot of lenses to go through. Like, is
Mhm.
there any like specific guidelines we can structure our meals off of? Like, I've heard, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I've also heard that you want to be eating, multiple meals, like 3 or 4, but you can also have much smaller meals. Like, really is there any like actual hard rules for that?
It again really depends on what you're trying to optimize for, right? If you are trying to optimize, and I think most people are, so I'm going to assume that if you're trying to optimize for muscle growth or muscle retention, there have been a lot of studies around what an optimal protein dose is, along with how that affects thinking around protein timing and meal size. So, and I know there's been some new research on this. I'm not up to date. I'm probably a couple years out of date. Generally, the most well supported understanding is that you generally want about 40 to 50 grams of protein per meal. And obviously, you can adjust that up or down based on your body weight. If that's kind of the maximum, so you probably don't want to adjust it up too far. What they find is that at a certain level of protein in one sitting, if you go beyond that, your body can't quite absorb it. And so it's beneficial then to spread that out. All that being said, I don't think breakfast is of particular importance. It's good for kids. So if you're still growing, you should be eating breakfast. But for an adult, it's not as important if you're going to be skipping meals. Our bodies at some level, the reason that not you, Adam, but other people like me are predisposed to getting fat is because our bodies are pretty good at putting on fat so we don't starve in times of famine. So in this society today where we don't often run out of food, being in at times in states of fasting is not a bad thing. It triggers autophagy, which is when this cleanup version of your cells, this protocol, and I'm probably getting that wrong, but it's not a bad thing. And I think there's a lot of emerging stuff that fasts aren't bad for you. So intermittent fasting, I don't think is bad. I don't think it's also a panacea, which means it doesn't solve all things. I think when it first came out, a lot of people were like, it's basically going to cure cancer and cure all evil. But it is not, it's a useful tool to skip breakfast because it's one meal that it's just easier to reduce your caloric intake, and it's more socially acceptable to skip breakfast than it is to skip dinner, so it kind of ticks a lot of boxes, but it's not some type of amazing solve all. I think the general rules I would say is I read this the other day and I think it's a good summary, which is if you can have like 30 to 50 grams of protein in a meal, if you can have some vegetables and maybe let's say a fistful of carbs, then you're pretty good. I think that's a pretty healthy meal. And you probably want to split your meals up at least a few hours in between them. Maybe the last part is you probably want to notice how you split your meals around a workout. If you're doing a workout, I know for me in particular, if I try to deadlift super heavy and I have a super big meal beforehand, I literally can't do it. I get gas and then I literally can't pressurize my sternum and my kind of core to be able to lift heavy. And so when I deadlift, I actually have to eat a very light meal beforehand. But for the rest of my types of work, so it doesn't affect me. So those are types of things that you'll learn about your body as you try this out. But that would be my general rule for things. I don't think there's anything hard and fast, and you will notice what works for you. For some people, if you skip a breakfast, if you try the intermittent fasting as an example, you might find you feel really bad because you're used to eating breakfast and that's what you prefer. And so it's not a hard and fast rule.
Gotcha. I was wondering if you have any examples for people on both ends. So, say someone is looking to gain weight and someone is looking to lose weight. Are there any like easy options or things they need to be looking out for to so that they can kind of apply now?
If you're trying to gain weight and you're naturally kind of underweight, then you need to be in a caloric surplus, which means that at some level, if you are weighing yourself, so weight goes up and down. So you can't go on a day by day basis. Most people would say weigh yourself every day and look at your average. If it's going up and you're trying to gain weight, that's obviously the right direction, but it's gonna go like this up and down. So you want to be one in a caloric surplus. So how do you do that? Well, obviously you could measure, but if you don't want to measure, there's a bunch of different ways to approach this. One, if you're going to be trying to gain weight and you're trying to gain muscle, then you definitely want to make sure at some level you're getting enough protein. And so if you're trying to get about 400 grams or 40 grams of protein in a meal, you should probably be having about 200 grams of lean meat in that meal. So if you just measure your protein, that's a helpful start to know when you're getting enough protein. Um, but if you're typically underweight, you probably don't tend to eat enough. So that's where you probably want to eat a little bit more calorically dense foods. So slightly more processed foods. So pastas, or you can eat a lot of rice. You can also add some desserts if you want as well. Like ice cream is not bad if you're trying to gain weight and it's struggle to gain weight. Other people would do a weight gainer shake, which is a protein shake with additional kind of like carbs in it. So those are all things you would just generally try to pick food that is a little more palatable, food that you want to eat more of, and then just try to tune that. The other thing you can notice is there's a kind of a movement called intuitive eating, which is really trying to notice how full you feel. And if you're trying to gain weight, you should probably notice how full you are and try to you know, get yourself to a level where you're a little maybe a bit beyond where you're comfortable. There's a scale we can look up. I forget what it's called, but you kind of rate your satiety, which is how full you feel, between 0 and 10. And eight, let's say eight is like you're just perfectly satisfied. If you're trying to gain weight, you should be like at a 9 or a 10, right? Which is
Mm,
like you're a little beyond satisfied. You're a little more full than you would like to be, or maybe a little uncomfortable. So that I would say would be the advice. And if you're trying to gain weight, then you shouldn't, and you're already struggling to, you probably shouldn't be skipping your breakfast. That's probably not an option for you. I think that would be the example of things to try, or the kind of approach if you're trying to gain weight.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And then how about for someone looking to lose weight?
I think if you're trying to lose weight, then you want to be restricting calories. And so that's actually where it can be easy or hard. You could lose weight and it wouldn't be healthy, but you could lose weight just eating Twinkies. You would be very, very hungry and it would be very, very hard. So then the question becomes, how do you lose weight and make it a little easier? By training your muscles, you're encouraging muscle protein synthesis, which is encouraging muscle growth. At the same time, you're in a caloric deficit, which means your body is losing weight. So hopefully your body's impetus to build more muscle will hopefully drive more of the weight loss to fat. And so how do we do that? You can actually, we said 0.7 to 1. I mean, an easier way to lose weight is actually to push that a little higher, to the point that it's actually a little uncomfortable to eat, because then you're getting fuller faster. Meat and fish are by far the most satiating foods, I believe. And so, I mean, it's certainly my experience too. You can imagine you're going to get way more full eating an especially overcooked piece of chicken breast than you will a bag of chips,
Right.
even if the bag of chips has way more volume, right? And so it just fills you up. And so eating a large piece of protein, eating lots of fibrous vegetables like broccolis or Chinese vegetables, um, those fill you up, as well as potatoes. A starchy potato gives you carbs, but it's also way more filling than the equivalent amount of rice. So you can prioritize really satiating foods, so that you don't feel as hungry all the time. Obviously, if you're trying to lose weight, there is no way to avoid being hungry. You will 100% be hungry at some point. That kind of means you're doing it right. But you can make it easier on yourself by choosing highly satiating foods. And almost by definition, then, if you're choosing highly satiating foods, you're really trying to avoid lots of fats, because the fats, one, don't make you full, and they're very calorically dense. That being said, you should have some fats, but if you're eating meats, you probably will just get enough from the oil you cook your meat in and some of the fat on the meat. um, but you just definitely don't want to be eating any processed foods. If you're struggling to lose weight, one of the easiest things to do is to cut out drinks that have calories in them, because those are a real killer. You can drink a drink with calories in them and you would still eat the exact same amount of food. So you just replace that with water. That's a huge area to lose weight. Or in particular, like sugary drinks, things like Avanti Frappuccino from Starbucks has tons of calories in it. So if you cut out those, that's one way to lose weight. Um, but yeah, generally, really processed foods, ice creams, cakes, things like that are things to cut out, especially when you're trying to lose weight, because they're gonna take up that bit of calorie intake that you're supposed to have and not make you feel full at all.
Yeah, you speaking about these like food things is makes me realize like why I have trouble gaining weight because like when I eat meals, I drink water. And when I don't like I don't prefer to have desserts or like sweet things. Like I didn't grow up eating ice cream or cakes or anything like that. Like so like I didn't have a sweet tooth or much of one. So it's in that sense harder for me to get those calorie dense foods.
You're the flip side of me, man. I have to remind myself that Safeway cake is terrible and I shouldn't eat like a double large serving when I'm at a kid's birthday, but I so want it.
Gotcha.
So we're different in
We are
that
different in that
respect.
aspect. The other thing is like it's good to talk about nutrition and like the macros and like your calories, but the actual food that we eat and getting that in front of you is the hard part for me.
Mm,
So, you know, you have the route of cooking for yourself. You also have
yes.
the route of, you know, buying pre-made meals that are like in the form of whatever company, or you can
Yeah.
buy fast food. I guess like how does one approach that type of thought process? Like you could go down one route, all in one. Like I cook everything. You could all go the route of like, you know, I don't cook anything. I buy everything, or you have like a middle ground here. Like, how does one approach this type of discussion?
You're gonna have to figure out what works for you. And I know that's not a great answer. I think it starts though with what is an easily because there's optimal. Like optimal would be, Adam, you should cook every single meal. It should be macro prepared, and then you'll know exactly what's going in, et cetera, et cetera. But if that's not possible, then let's not even consider it. It doesn't even matter, right? So, what are the tactics that we can implement that moves you in the right direction? So, can you eat reasonable meals through fast food? I would say not true fast food. Like, there's no world, unless you're really struggling to gain weight, that I would tell you to go eat Wendy's or McDonald's. But certainly you can craft a meal for yourself at Chipotle that I think is totally fine. It's a little high in sodium, but that's not the end of the world as long as you're not eating it all the time. So I think, things like that you can eat, you have kind of ready-made food that is aligned with your goals and isn't bad. I think it's also browsing the grocery aisle and seeing what's like frozen foods. There's a lot more like healthy frozen foods that you can get now than you used to. I remember, as an example, if you're trying to lose weight, a lot of things people would do is they would make themselves cauliflower rice. And so you take cauliflower, you take it home, you grind it up in your food processor. It makes a huge mess, and then you would eat cauliflower rice because it kind of gives you a feeling of like broken rice, um, but not quite as good, but it kind of gives you this sense of rice. But now you can just go buy cauliflower rice. It just comes frozen. You don't have to even do that. So there's like options that you can find at the grocery store that support you. And then I think when you do cook food at home, if that's a real struggle, then you don't want to be following Jamie Oliver's recipes and like or Gordon Ramsay's recipes and cooking some gourmet meal for yourself and you're trying to macro. You're probably just trying to optimize for what's the easiest. And so I think then you're trying to optimize for food that you can cook in large batches. So then instead of thinking of like, oh, we're going to look up a recipe, I think the easier thing would be, what's a recipe that I can throw in an instant pot and just turn it on and eat it later? That's easy. Or what's something I can mix up together and throw in the oven and then eat it in an hour? And then eat the leftovers for the next few days. That's a way better solution because then you're doing it once for many times rather than once for each time. And so those I think are at least the tactics that come to mind for me that you can try to implement and see which ones stick and work for you. Or maybe if all of them work, you can kind of do all of them. But there's no one good way. Gaining weight is one direction, and in that way it's asymmetric. I think it's way easier to be a bit loose on this if you're trying to gain weight. If you're really trying to lose weight, professional bodybuilders 100% weight everything, cook almost everything. It's impossible almost to be in that super competitive, but for a normal human being you could totally make all of these strategies work.
Gotcha. Just out of curiosity, how does that work in your life? Do you cook most of your meals, or is it balanced?
We kind of eat dinner as a family, and we always have kind of enough protein for me, so I generally do that. I'll do the occasional protein shake after I work out. I'm usually not eating breakfasts Monday to Friday. I've cut out alcohol for the near term because I'm just trying to lose a bit of weight. I think I need to be a little more strict around not eating treats because that's pretty much, I think, my kryptonite. So I think if I do that, that's actually enough for me to lose weight. I don't have to track macros, also because I'm not looking to get really, really lean and shredded. If I were looking to get really lean and shredded, at some point, I think I would have to switch to tracking macros. Jeff Nippert actually has a really great series of videos on like his experiences doing intuitive eating. So that's what I've been trying to trend back to. The problem with doing macros and tracking everything is that when you leave that world of tracking macros, you actually lose a sense of how full you are, and you almost don't know how to eat anymore unless someone apportions it for you. So it's not something I love, and that's why I haven't transitioned back to it. Also, it's just a ton of work as well.
Gotcha. Well, I think we covered a lot, most of my questions. Do you have anything else that you want to add to that?
What are you going to change?
For me, I think I'm gonna look into easier meal stuff. So, like, obviously, you have the instant pot, you have one pot recipes, and I think I need to be making sure that I have something prepped for lunch. Otherwise, I just don't eat it.
Mm,
Um, in terms of the protein thing, making sure I get, you know, 30 to 50 grams of protein. I kind of knew that as a guideline, but I wasn't super, I guess, strict on it. I didn't keep it up. And yeah, I think that's where I'll start. Those two things.
And I think when you are making food choices because you're trying to gain weight, you should be really optimizing for things that you are excited to eat.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever that looks like, go for it.
Vietnamese food. Love me my Vietnamese food.
Mm.
Gotta find some recipes.
Yeah, you just make more banh mi's,
Yes.
slather on that liver pate,
Dude,
and
the
you're
pate is so good.
it is so good. People just think it's mayonnaise. It's not. And that's one way of doing it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
Thanks everyone for joining us. I hope this episode was helpful. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to throw it in the comments. Again, we are not doctors or nutritionists. I've just been doing this for a while, so hopefully this was helpful, and hopefully this can help you navigate when you see, read, or hear about this in social media or on YouTube. If you are planning to do any of this and you don't have clearance, you should talk to a doctor before you do any of this. Thanks for tuning in. We always appreciate it, and we will have an announcement on the community soon. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you, Tim.